everybody. Happy to see you all here. I'm going to ask before we begin that if you have hearing impairments or you feel as though we're not using our big voices, to please feel free to move up. Maddie, our curator of all things at Crowell Chapel, has kindly added more chairs, and we will not find it the least bit distracting if you scoot up. We welcome a sense of community in this neighborhood. Tonight concludes the series that began in February. The Distinguished Speaker Series has been, by design, eclectic, and we have hoped that we have represented many of your interests, although with a town as diverse as Manchester, I'm sure we haven't covered them all, although that is our ambition. In the future, we plan to have an art show that will be comprehensive, but more about that later. Tonight's distinguished speakers are familiar to you, although you may not recognize the faces of Paul Clark and Erika Brown. They are our neighbors in that they drop off the most interesting record of town business every week to our mailboxes. The Cricket is our paper of record, and it is, in many ways, the heart of our town, and I think if we looked closely, they bleed ink around here. They have a distinguished record of our town's affiliation with the paper, 136 years, is that right?
That's correct.
And to their great credit, they have continued to be a presence in town with an ambition to stay current. They have received 18 awards that are both national and local, and it's something to be proud of in a very small community. And it is being so well recognized that both Senator Warren of Massachusetts and Senator Lindsey Graham have combined forces in support of the concept of local papers. And in particular, if Erika does not mind, Erika has been recognized by Senator Warren for her great support of local papers because it is part of our nature and it is very much important to maintain local ties. Paul Clark's career began in many places, but one of his distinguished accomplishments has been to teach our children computer science before there was such a thing. Come on in, come on out. And then a newborn is here, perfect place. Paul started a computer program in the public schools and taught our kids computer science before there was such a thing. And one of his students, who is a huge and grateful supporter of Paul's academic past, said he was cool before there was such a thing. And he taught the kids how to read computer.
Hey?
Yeah, he knows.
She's laughing.
There you go. That's great. He taught the kids when computers were still printing in black and white. So it was a couple of years ago. Paul's been with the Cricket since, it was 10 years before Erika started in 2018. Math is not my strong suit. But I'm going to turn the floor over tonight to the dynamic duo. This is our first time since the series began to have a tag team. So they don't need me, and I encourage you to encourage them to share their archival materials from 136 years ago.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
we're going to do it in 45 minutes. I thought I'd just quickly start out. I actually have notes, which is rare for me, but it's because I don't want to miss anything that I'm going to say. Today, as a rough count, the Manchester Cricket Archive has 62,044 pages, newspaper pages of what the youths of today would call content. So that's the archive of the Manchester Cricket, and that is a lot of content. It's certainly too much for us to go into comprehensively today. But I will say, to me, the archive is magic. It's like a magic box. It's a digital box that you just ask things and it tells you the most incredible stories about our past. They're personal, they're important, they can be a little crazy and funny, and it's an amazing thing. The first thing that we did when I took over the paper in 2018 was to digitize the Cricket and to do it in partnership with the Friends of the Manchester Library and donate it to the library for use for anybody to have for free. And the reason why I did that is because it is really, really important, and I encourage anybody to do it. My husband, it's a personal story, my husband, his family came here in 1904, and believe me, they tell stories of their family and they think they know it all. He went into the archive and he found stories that none of them knew, and many of them, and they were very important. So please, you guys should do it for yourselves. Now, I thought I would just tell you a little bit about the cricket, because I know a lot of people know about the cricket, but be patient with me. The first edition of the paper was published on May 19th, 1888. The publisher was Albert Wittem. He was the publisher of the Beverly Times. And the first editor was Isaac Marshall, I.M. Marshall. And I.M. Marshall ended up being the editor through 1945 officially. So he was there for quite a while. He was there for a long time. In the early 1920s, the Cricket purchased the neighboring paper, the Essex Echo, which is why you see the Essex Echo in the paper each week. That had been around actually since about 10 years before the Manchester Cricket. So that had an archive of about 40 years, a little more, when it purchased the paper. And then in 1922, the Slade family essentially purchased the Cricket and created the Cricket Press, which was a printing company, and I.M. Marshall was the president of that company. So he ended up having sort of a continuity there, which is awesome. So there were four Slades actually that were editors of the paper. So it was a very long time, and just under 100 years later, I took over in 2018. So there you go. That's the history. The paper has done a lot of things in 136 years, as you can imagine. I.M. Marshall, by the way, he's kind of close to my heart just from reading and looking through the archive. He lost his daughter at 13 years old to the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918. It was heartbreaking. He wrote her obituary, and he ran it on the front page of the paper. Think about that. About 10 years later, he took a break from editing, and he decided to travel, like in the 20s. And he traveled to exotic locations around the globe, and they included Russia, Denmark, Holland, and Los Angeles, which I love. And he actually would write dispatches. Even when he was traveling abroad, he wrote dispatches and he sent them back to Manchester, and they published them on the front page, and they always started the same: "Dear folks back home." It was a lovely thing. As a matter of fact, Dan Senecal, he actually purchased for me a book that I.M. Marshall published of his travels, and it's called Zigzag Journeys in Classic Lands Abroad, and this is one of them. So it's a lovely, lovely connection. On this table, I welcome you to come up. There's a series of things, including the first ever Manchester Cricket is published, and it's open, the 100th anniversary of the paper, both in terms of the printed paper and the actual cut and paste. That's actually how newspapers were produced. You actually cut and pasted them onto a piece of paper before you turned them into a plate that would create a page, right? So the original cut and pasted page layout for the 100th anniversary is there, and then so is the newspaper that was printed. So it's kind of fun to take a look. Judge Morley, I don't know if, I'm gonna look around and hope that you guys recognize these names, but Judge Morley look at Judge Morley in the archive. He was such a good writer. He was a columnist, a regular columnist for the Cricket, and he wrote a book, actually, A Day in Court, and he wrote and worked right up until the day he died. He went home and died after a day of work. So, in any case, thank you to the Manchester Public Library. Thank you to the Manchester Cultural Council for this. This is such a lovely program, and I think it's amazing. You guys do amazing work. And the last thing I'll say, first of all, I inherited Paul. He had been with the paper for 10 years before I joined, and he was a godsend. And I have to say, this program tonight is probably more for him than it is for me, because one thing, he is the truest lover of local history. Many initiatives that you read long before I came that had to do with local history and local artifacts and local games with local history and local artifacts are the result of his passion. So we're going to have a conversation, and many of these things are going to be things that are his favorites from the archive and things that are my favorites, mostly his. And, and we'll go over things like, we might touch on the Masconomo Hotel, police stories, which is different from police notes, right? Something called Peach of the Beach. Anyone remember that? You'll know. And there are rare but colorful episodes of violence. So that's me, I'm gonna bring those up to you. And there are some heartbreaks and a lot of laughs too. So the only thing I'd say before we start is I'd be remiss if I didn't give you notice that local newspapers are really, really important. In a time of technology, they're still incredibly relevant. Local news, there's information you can't get from anywhere else, even in an AI world, and so I need to say that. So thank you. Okay, Paul.
All right.
So where do you want to get started?
I'm going to start probably with where we are.
I think that's a good idea.
It's not a bad idea, this beautiful building.
Crowell Chapel.
The Crowell Chapel. And I'm going to start by saying the scripture reading for this evening is from John 3, verses 1 through 164. Oh, wait a minute. Usually when I'm in a church, I'm reading the scripture. And this is not a church, it's a chapel. I want to give you a little bit of history about this gorgeous building. And the presenter, Susan Crowell, and her sister and her brother lived on Union Street. And they wanted to build, Susan wanted to build in preparation for giving her brother Ben something beautiful. Unfortunately, he never saw it. He passed away before it was built. She built it in memory of Benjamin Franklin Crowell, who never saw it. He died 2,000 miles away in Colorado. And his sister Susan had it built in his memory, and it was built in like 1905. Now, the only reason she had the money to do that is that one time in the 20s, Benjamin Franklin Crowell left to go in search of gold. And he went out west, and he started panning for gold unsuccessfully, started as a sheep farmer unsuccessfully, but then he became started the first and largest bank in the territory where he was located. The family, the sisters, fell into bad times, poor times, and they had to take in boarders for the summer because they had no money. Eventually, Ben became rather wealthy, and he started sending money back to the sisters to help them along with their life. So they were able to later in life, after he had passed away, he knew nothing about this gorgeous building. They had the wherewithal later in life with the money that they had to have this building built, and it appears that there's no money was not an issue here to build this building. It's just absolutely gorgeous. He used to come home back. He used to come back to Manchester every year. She built it of a Gothic design, as you can see. Let me get more information here. February 6, 1904, issue of the Manchester Cricket tells about the new chapel. And I'll just read you a little description. February 6th, by the way, is my birthday. Month and day, but not the year. The tower at the entrance is 60 feet high with heavily buttressed sides and roof supported by massive oak trusses. The stained glass made by Horace Phipps of Boston is unique. Nothing quite like it in the world. This is Susan's doing. Her concept was for 2 panels of the windows to show an oak tree on either side. 2 of these panels in the back. You'll see a giant tree in the past out of the windows. Standing for the 2 sides of the families, the Allens and the Crowells. They extend upward, join above, and intertwine with grapevines and fruit to fill the upper portion of the windows. The building was almost torn down in the 1970s. It fell into such disarray. It was damaged, and they were actually going to tear this gorgeous building down. So some people got together, some folks, and put together a project over a series of years. They raised $220,000 in a restoration effort, and the building became useful again. It's only been used for weddings, funerals, and lately concerts and other talking events, speeches, and the like. In October, actually they timed the events to be in the early evening so that the light would come in through the windows, through these gorgeous windows. In October of this year, descendants of Benjamin, sisters Alicia Lee Crowell Newman and Cindy Crowell Cotton visited the chapel traveling from California, and that we had pictures of that in the paper a couple of weeks ago. Now, one interesting side note here is that out this side of the chapel, there's a stone from a Civil War veteran named Dennis O'Sullivan, who was shot in Civil War, and the bullet was hit his knife, was deflected, saving his life. He has the bullet, or had the bullet, and it's actually encrusted in his stone right out here. As you first walk in the entrance of the cemetery, you can see that Dennis O'Sullivan stone.
I love that.
Do you have a story about
I do. Why don't you
saving
sit
them?
down?
I will. Yeah.
We could talk. I have a story that's kind of similar, and it kind of is connected to Dennis O'Sullivan and the fact that he was saved by a shot into the abdomen by his knife. And that story is from, I think it's from Dennis O'Sullivan. This one's around the same time. That's what my point.
The mid-1800s.
Oh, okay. Well, mine's way later.
Yeah.
Okay. So this story ran both in the Essex Echo and the Manchester Cricket, and the headline is "Cutting Affray Disturbs Usual Sunday Calm. Prominence of both parties creates profound sensation." And then the subhead: "Well-known Essex lady narrowly escapes death from knife thrust." So this is quite a story. It's awesome. I love it. It wasn't particularly funny at the time, I'm sure.
I don't think so.
And I love the writing in these old editions. "Our community was greatly stirred last Sunday over a shocking affair that occurred just after the close of morning service." And this is in Essex, by the way. "The worshipers were leaving the Congregational Church, and among them was Mrs. Grace Story of this town. Soon after leaving the building, a lady stepped up to her, who, it was afterwards learned, was Mrs. Florence Hunt of Beverly, and at once engaged in earnest conversation, which grew more and more animated as the two walked along together until reaching the waiting room at Raymond's drugstore. Mrs. Hunt, it is alleged, drew a knife and made a savage thrust at Mrs. Story, striking her in the breast, but before any further demonstration could be made, bystanders stepped in and separated the two women. The injured woman was attended by Dr. Simpson, who found that the wound was not immediately serious, but not being very deep, and her corset having arrested the force of the blow. Dr. Tucker of Ipswich, by the way, in all these old things, the doctor's always from Ipswich. I don't know why. Anyway, had charge of the case, and it's fearful that peritonitis or other complications may yet set in. As to the reasons for the vicious attack, the interested parties are reticent. But it is alleged that it was caused by jealousy on the part of the Beverly lady, who is accused Mrs. Story of alienating her husband's affections and evidently came to Essex with the intention of seeking revenge. No arrests have been made, and the disposition seems to keep the matter as quiet. The disposition seems to be to keep the matter as quiet as possible. Mrs. Hunt, who drove down from Beverly, returned home immediately after the affair. Naturally, the assassination has been the talk of the town all week, and a matter for much to be remitted. Mr. and Mrs. Story being highly respected citizens and having high family connections. I love that story. It's actually from 1908, and it's very clear that the Beverly lady, being able to drive herself in her own car, probably also came from a wealthy family, and that probably is the reason why they wanted to keep it nice and quiet. Anyway.
Interesting.
So-
Very interesting. I want to talk about Masconomo, Sachem Masconomo. There is a statue, not too tall, maybe 3.5 feet tall, in the town hall honoring him. He was very well honored in Manchester. Here in Manchester, there's Masconomo Park, Masconomo Street, the Masconomo Council of the Knights of Columbus, and mention of the chief appears in the town hymn. The name Masconomo, or Masconomet, which also appears in the title of the regional high school in Boxford. During the depressions of the 1930s, the Elder Brethren, at their 103rd annual Old Man's Chowder Party, declared that they would like to have a statue made for Chief Masconomo to be at Masconomo Park. So they decided that they were going to hire a sculptor named George Ahrens, who was given the commission to execute the statue and did so. Although rather unknown at the time, Ahrens, who died only a few years ago, went on to international fame. The Museum of Fine Arts in Boston bought 5 pieces from his estate. His model for the bronze or granite statue that was to stand in the park was refused by the town's elders because they didn't like the looks of it. Mr. Adams was in advance of his time. His severe design did not resemble the sort of cigar store Indian that the authorities were used to. The plaster model, 2.5 feet high, is one of a man of great dignity. The straight and simple lines of the robe he is wearing fall to the ground, concealing his legs. His arms are bare and folded on his chest, his hair in a long braid down his back. His face is striking, at once proud but not arrogant, virile and handsome. It's a statue of a man who has a dignity, whatever might have been his last tragic state after his nomadic culture clashed with the settlers. The widow of the sculptor was willing to sell the model and agreed that the town of Manchester is the proper place for it. $2,000 would purchase the statue and pay to have it cast in bronze. It was not cast in bronze. It was left in plaster, painted to resemble granite, and kept under glass at one time at the Manchester Historical Society or at the library, and hence had been moved to maybe a more important place, centerpiece for in the town hall.
Wasn't that a public works project too?
I'm not sure
Part
that
of
was.
the-
It was during the Depression.
Yeah, I think that was one of the art projects that was.
But the
money was
fact that
provided.
the elders didn't agree that, I mean, this obviously not PC, didn't agree with what kind of description of an Indian might need to be.
Yeah. Well, it's also Masconomo Hotel, which I would recommend people to look up that. You could do an entire evening on the Masconomo Hotel, and Corey Kukuru from 1623 Studios and Bridge Cape Ann did an amazing timeline Cape Ann using the archives of the cricket, mostly, although also the Gloucester Daily Times has an incredible cricket, also available at the library. And it was 4 stories high, could accommodate 300 when it was opened in 1879. Right along Singing Beach. It was a huge hotel that brought tons of people. Everyone knows the story of the Booth family, which were essentially the biggest stars of the theater of the day. And of course also John Wilkes Booth assassinated the president, making it infamous. But there's an amazing article that was done from a presentation in 1960 at the Manchester Historical Society, and it was really a thorough look using archival quotes about the productions and the outdoor theater and all sorts of things. And it was expanded, by the way, to accommodate 400 people, and it had cottages, a bowling alley, it had everything. It was incredible. Look it up, it's awesome. Anyway.
And a side note to that is that there's a Booth plot here at Rosedale, and members of the Booth family were buried in it. And there was a rumor at one time that J.W. Booth, John Wilkes, was buried there, but the cemetery keeper at the time denied that was true. So how to find that out. I don't
Exactly,
know.
exactly. Although it's funny, they actually addressed that in the 1960 article. I was just reading it today, and it has a whiff of like not quite true to it, you know, but who knows? At the end, they acknowledge that plot, that there are, you know, the Junius Booth is there,
Yeah.
and the brothers are there, and that's where they're buried, and that there was rumors that John Wilkes Booth, but they had it, but they don't think that rumor was true, that they had a source saying he was really buried down in Baltimore, and that area was where he was killed, the showdown, but they had to put in the same cemetery as members of the royal family, some sort of connection to the royal family. I thought, not so sure.
No.
So what do we want to talk about next?
One of my favorite stories.
I love this. I know where you're going.
One of my favorite stories. It's titled Infernal Machines. And so I know Nick will definitely know this for sure. Here and in other cities and towns around the nation, the number of autos was increasing annually, as was the record of complaints about the infernal machines, whose speed and recklessness was angering citizens and disturbing public peace. Scorchers, they were called. And Chief Samuel Peabody of the Manchester Police Department undoubtedly frustrated himself by many court experiences similar to the one described above. A case was deemed undecided because it was, he said, a conflict, deciding that something could be done to provide clear evidence that a vehicle was exceeding the town's speed limits. On the job for just 2 years, the chief in 1907 turned to his mechanically minded son, Alan S. Peabody, an old name from Manchester, then caretaker of the estate of Philip Dexter, another big Manchester name. Soon Alan had devised an ingenious system. It consisted of 2 sentry boxes designed to look like dead tree trunks. Located exactly 1 mile apart, within each box was a Manchester police officer equipped with a stopwatch and a telephone.
Rate times time equals distance.
The necessary wires were run underground for a mile between the 2 boxes. When a vehicle which the officer suspected might be speeding past his observation point, he started his stopwatch and phoned his partner with a description of the car and its license number. The numbers were probably like 28, 29, 30. The second officer immediately synchronized his watch, which he then stopped on the second the unsuspecting driver passed his station, quickly consulting a rate, time, and distance table. He determined whether the law had been broken. If it had, the scorcher was stopped by a third constable, also in touch by telephone, posted somewhat further on. Thus was the speed trap so familiar to us today, born in Manchester, Massachusetts. You can get some idea of the work we are obliged to do, said Chief Peabody, when I tell you that during the months of July and August, there was not a Sunday afternoon that we did not time more than 1,000 cars. Weekend driving was indeed a popular pastime. Speed traps were so successful that 2 were established in Manchester. One was on Bridge Street. Nobody speeds there, I know. Opposite the Winthrop Farm in West Manchester. The other was in the so-called Cove section on Summer Street on the Magnolia side of town. The problem of scorchers was finally under control.
Pretty wild, huh?
Scorchers. And I don't know what the speed limit might have been, like 25 miles an hour or something like that.
Exactly.
But the newspaper is full of accidents heading from here to Gloucester, mostly, on a hill called Crafts Hill, which goes down from Hickory Hill and then by Ocean Street. And there were many, believe it or not, fatalities. There could have been one every 2 months or so. But there were amazing accidents there. It'd be interesting to go into the woods there with a metal detector or something and see what kinds of parts you can find out of there to put in your garage.
As a matter of fact, there's another Corey Kukuru timeline, Cape Ann, was about the I don't know if anybody read it in the paper, but it was a huge, huge jewelry heist at the hotel in Magnolia. the Ocean Cliff Hotel.
Cliff Hotel.
Which was another grand hotel, and there was a very famous Boston jeweler, a Newbury Street type of, Back Bay jeweler that had a summer residence there, and they had a tremendous amount. For a long time, it was America's greatest jewelry heist in terms of value. And it only took 20 minutes. It was 4 men. They suspected later that they came out of sort of a robbery kind of guild of sorts out of Providence, Rhode Island. And so they came up, they had machine guns. It took 20 minutes. It was in the 30s. And it was during the time of Bonnie and Clyde. So this was kind of very, it had captured the nationals' attention, this kind of sexy bank robbery type stuff. And so they showed up in 20 minutes. They tied up a 12-year-old boy who was the only witness who kind of talked afterwards. And they took all the jewelry, $6 million worth of jewelry. And the last time they were seen was on 2 wheels railing around the corner at Bailey's Garage, basically, in Manchester. And that was the last time that they were seen and witnessed. So there was a little high-speed stuff. I wonder if they got caught. But that was the 1930s.
We have to look that up.
Anyway, so let's do German spy, Paul.
All right, we actually had a German spy in town, here in town, that the FBI was looking for, a gentleman named Oswald Kuhnhardt, a former consul general at Boston for Germany and Austria, and for some years a resident in Manchester. On Wednesday afternoon, the chief of police, William Sullivan, again, and under the arrest put out by District Attorney Judd Dewey, the arrest was made on Singing Beach. Kuhnhardt having arrived in Manchester on the 3:20 train from Boston, where he was a local representative of the Berlin Aniline Works. On reaching Manchester, he went at once to the beach, and when approached by the chief, he was in company with 2 ladies of the summer colony and a gentleman friend. He was called aside by the chief, who made known that he was wanted by the Department of Justice. He returned to his friends, taking leave of them, and accompanied the officers in an automobile, first to the police station, and then to his boarding place in a private family's home on School Street, where there were 2 Secret Service men already looking into searching the property. He seemed considerably surprised at the arrest, and on the way up talked a little and seemed considerably depressed. And he, as very few criminals say, I am not guilty of this crime.
Wow. Okay.
So that must have been exciting. And on Singing Beach.
On Singing Beach.
Right.
Exactly.
Huh? When was that? That was in, it was maybe like, must have been like 44.
Yeah. We're jumping around in dates.
We have
we'll
dates
sort of
that
orient you with dates. But speaking of Singing Beach, can we talk for a little bit about Bruce Lesane?
We can.
And Captain Dusty's?
Yes, we can.
So Bruce Lesane found his way to Manchester on the train.
On the train during the Depression. The story read in the Cricket as the real Captain Dusty. His name was Bruce Lesane. You don't have to live in Manchester long or walk up Beach Street to Singing Beach before discovering the yellow shack called Captain Dusty's. Before it became home to some of the best ice cream on the North Shore, it was a renowned seafood shop whose proprietor, Bruce Lesane, became known as Captain Dusty. He had a very interesting story. We'll share some of this with you. He was born on South Island off the coast of South Carolina in 1905. He moved with his mother, 2 brothers, and a sister to New York when he was 10. Coincidentally, South Island was later named Yawkey Island for you-know-who, when the former Red Sox owner purchased it. Bruce was discovered by a Long Island doctor as Bruce lay in bed, stranded in a hospital with malaria. The doctor eventually adopted Bruce and 4 other children into his home. The doctor's brother was a Catholic priest, and Bruce spent 8 years as the church custodian. At the age of 18, he moved to Boston and began working as a porter, a Pullman porter. They sent him to school for 6 weeks. He learned to cook, cut hair, and shine shoes.
Wow.
That was going to be his job. His skills as a porter led him into the employ of Albert C. Burridge, big name in Manchester at one time, a millionaire who had a private train car, as a lot of people on the Gold Coast did have private train cars. A little side, they'd pull them off to the side of the, and then take a carriage or something to their mansions. He had a private train car, maintained an estate in Manchester. Bruce traveled the country on the newest and finest thing in private cars the country had ever known. Burridge owned homes in Manchester, Boston, and Redlands, California. He transported his polo ponies, as most of us do, from the East Coast to the West Coast. Bruce recalled that this was a great life. After the stock market crash in 1929, Bruce found himself without a job as the private train stopped its travels and the porters were dismissed in Manchester. Bruce found himself stranded. He knew he had to find a way to support himself, and he knew even during the Depression, people had to eat. So he purchased a rowboat with money left by Mr. Burridge and fished with a hand line. He used to sell the fish out of a wheelbarrow that he would push around town. Customers from Baker's Island asked him for some fillets, and he told her he only sold fish in the round. He later visited the local library and learned how to fillet fish, which he could sell for a premium. He opened Captain Dusty's before the start of World War II and ran until 1990. During the war, fish was exempt from rationing. So he fished from his boat, the Dirty Shame.
I love that name. The Dirty Shame.
Dirty Shame, and 3 times a day visited the crates, his lobster traps. He had it in place around the North Shore. His red and black buoys were well known in the area. Bruce said that in all the years he spent on the water, he never had any problems with other fishermen because he was black. So later on, he became well known taking people out on his boat, the Dirty Shame, and he would take visitors out and have clam bakes and lobster bakes, and lobster was so prevalent that was not a big deal. At one time, Bruce owned a wooden Ford station wagon. He and his wife Margaret took Chris Nahadas to Harlem and bought him a hot dog and a Coke for 10 cents. They came back the same day. Chris also remembers traveling out to Baker's Island with Bruce in his boat to play for dances. Bruce on the banjo, Chris on the drums, and later in high school, Chris Nahadas had a band called Chris Nahadas and his swing band. So he used to have a famous cooking, the way he used to cook the lobsters, it was called lobster a la manifold. When commenting on his advancing age, he died at 85, he said, "I guess there won't be any color in Manchester when I die."
He was actually profiled by National Geographic and Ebony?
Yeah, Ebony magazine. Yeah.
That's right. So, so he was quite a person. And one of the things that I like is we also inherited the photo archive, which was amazing. Dick Toll took most of the photos for the paper. He also worked for the police, so we have a lot of police photos too, which are not the same. But it's really interesting to look at the test sheets to see which ones to see the selects. Because back in the day, the selects were very formal, kind of nice pictures. I prefer things that are a little more, capture the moment type of things. And one of my favorite pictures is a picture that it was not chosen of Bruce Lesane with Mike Costello, who was the longtime president of the Chamber, the Cape Ann Chamber of Commerce. He was giving him an award. It was probably the late 80s. Yeah. And Bruce Lesane is laughing because they must have said something really funny. He had looked so handsome, and his laugh was, that would have been my select. It was incredible. And I also noticed that lobster in the background, I think it was like 69 cents a pound still. It's like crazy. Anyway, there you go. All right, Peach on the Beach.
Peach of the Beach. This again is not PC.
It's a beauty contest on Singing Beach, I'll just say that.
A beauty contest on Singing Beach.
Peach of the Beach.
Rita Babcock was chosen Peach of the Beach and was crowned Miss Singing Beach on Sunday at Singing Beach. This is a report. Miss Babcock was awarded the 3-foot silver trophy donated by the Amarillo Legion Post to the applause of the onlookers. The daughter of Mr. and Mrs. John A. Babcock of Ocean Street. She's a cheerleader and interested in sports. Laddie Dean, daughter of Mrs. William Dean of School Street, was the runner-up, followed by Charlene Bradbury, Carol Hoysrat, Cindy Littlefield. The contest was initiated by the girls of Manchester High School early in June with 46 contestants, judging each week on the amount of time spent on the beach, not so likely, looks, maybe, personality, gradually eliminated all but 10 semifinalists. Sunday climaxed the summer contest with the crowning of the winner. Included in the semifinals until last week were Gretchen Dombrowski, Jerry Hoysrat, Marjorie Lane, and Mary Ann Dennis. So it was started by the girls of Manchester Junior Senior High School. We were lucky to have on our front page of the paper Miss Janice Milner, daughter of Mrs. John A. Milner, late Mr. Milner, was crowned Miss Singing Beach at the ceremony Sunday afternoon. Janice, a graduate of class of 1966, was the winner in a field of 56 teenagers who were entered in the contest. The 18-year-old Queen is working as a dental assistant for Dr. Sam Ina.
There you go.
The 18-year-old Queen is working as a dental assistant. Her prizes include a trophy given by the American Legion Post, a hairstyle by Millie, a bouquet of flowers from Wedelow & Sons, and dinner for 4 through the courtesy of the town restaurant. Runner-up was Charlene Bradbury. She received a trophy donated by Hooper's Grocery Store. Dinner for 2 for the runner-up from the town restaurant. A set of earrings given by the sea urchin, and a case of Coca-Cola from Larry's Locker. And we were very fortunate to have her visit, Janice Redding had her visit the cricket at one time holding the newspaper, and I have a picture with her together, and she was just as beautiful as she was as an 18-year-old.
I will attest to that. I will say that. I've seen it. All right, I'm going to give one of my favorites that's going to be a segue, but for the police anecdotes.
Ooh, the police anecdotes.
Yeah, the police. There's like a little bit of a theme of police tonight. So this story is from December the 28th, 1979, so a little more. I bet a lot of people here, Gretchen, you probably remember this. I actually ran into, I just ran into somebody, I just ran into Lee Gates when I was voting, and he said that it would be no problem for me to tell this story. Okay, so this is, I'm just going to read it. The headline is, Manchester State Police overcome and arrest gunman. Hostages escape unharmed. You remember this? All right. Christmas is unusually quiet. Christmas is usually quiet downtown for most people, but this year was an exception. At about 9:30 on Christmas morning, Manchester police were notified that a man was holding Manchester Lodge master Louis Gates hostage in the Masonic Temple. Local police were alerted by Lester Strangman, who would manage to escape from the lodge. That was the lead. It's awesome. No byline on this, although I'm sure it was Danny Slade. Strangman had gone to the Masonic Temple to get some chairs. You gotta love that. He was met by Ernest J. Lessen Jr. at gunpoint. Lessen had said, I think it's probably Lessen. Lessen held Strangman hostage with a .22 caliber rifle. He questioned him about the activities at the lodge. He apparently was a man who was clearly mentally unstable and had decided that the Masons were the reason for the oil crisis, the Iran hostages, and all sorts of things. And this is a true story. Anyway, so the details are awesome. So the gunman was, Strangman actually knocked the gun from his hands, but the gunman actually reclaimed it, and he was kind of out of luck. But then, oddly, the gunman told him to go and get go and get the television crews and things like that. So he actually got Lou Gates to come down because he was the Masonic guy who he wanted to talk to. And anyway, Police Chief Felix Raddick was the police chief at the time. He was notified at his home. He immediately called state police. They were all called in, the cavalry. By 10 o'clock, they were all there. So this is 9:30 to 10. It was very, very fast. And they had a special unit that was trained for hostage situations, apparently, and they were quite good. So here's this. Lassant refused to surrender to police, and he threatened to start shooting unless television crews were called to the scene to film him on national television. He wanted them to listen to, and he continued to blame the Masons for everything from the crisis at Chappaquiddick to the Iran crisis. So they called in WCVB and a couple of others, and they brought them actually into the Masonic Hall. So Lassagne started serving them coffee through the window from the kitchen in the Masonic Hall out while he was talking, and the crews were about 30 feet away. So the police were there, and and the local police and everything. So from the kitchen of the lodge, he passed out coffee and made a speech to TV cameras. At one point, he extended his arm out the window, and State Trooper Joseph Machado, who had positioned himself underneath the window, reached up, grabbed the guy's arm, wrestled them to the ground with Ken Sikarsky, who, a Manchester police officer. So they subdued and they handcuffed him. The rifle was used, and it was passed to Joe Aiello, another police officer. He ended up going to court, etc. But among the first to confront at the beginning of the siege were officers Aiello, Ron Ramos, and Alfred Powers. That must be Carol Powers' husband, right? Yes. Who spoke briefly with him before Chief Raddick arrived at the scene. Chief Raddick and his men are commended for the most professional manner in a seriously dangerous situation. I mean, that's funny, and yet it's rather serious. So. And everybody was home for Christmas, so they all must have seen it. It was like a front row view. It was kind of wild. Anyway.
Well, I've got a couple of little anecdotes to read to you folks. Mm-hmm. Police work in the 1890s seemed less violent than it is today. A smaller world then. This story is called The Missing Cakes. Police work at the end of the last century involved itself with issues quite different from today. In the 1890s and early 1900s, almost every issue of the Manchester Cricket reported one or more runaway horses, most attached to a wagon, and many causing injury not only to the animal involved, but to pedestrians as well. There were petty thefts from houses, such as one in January 1894 at the railroad gatekeeper's cottage at Babcock Crossing. It was broken into, and 2 valuable razors and a Baldwin apple were taken. But although it was reported to police, it took a wily landlady to solve the case of the missing cakes. An excellent cook, she regularly baked cakes which were hugely popular with her boarders. One day, however, she noticed they seemed to be disappearing at a faster rate than normal. Sensing that one of her tenants might be guilty of appropriating more than his share, she seasoned the tops of the next batch with snuff. And, as the Cricket reported, so it must be true, sat up to await developments. They were not long in coming. All had retired to rest, but soon from one room came the sounds of fearful sneezing. The door was opened, and the party then and there was obliged to plead guilty to the crime. Snuff. This story is called For Sale, 3 Pollock. In 1892, according to a story in the Cricket, so it must be true, police had a queer lodger at the station on Monday night. He was rather a rough-looking customer, having on a pair of rubber boots and overshoes to protect them. He had a basket on his arm containing 3 pollock, which he was trying to sell. He said he had just arrived from George's Bank, and was going to Boston where he could get a better price for the fish. In the morning, he started out again calling from house to house to sell the pollock, but without success. He was last seen going through West Manchester toward the hub. He was eventually, evidently, the Cricket concluded, a trifle out of plumb. 1 beer short of a 6-pack. Yeah. Catch me if you can. Liquor also was a major factor leading to arrests, and dealing with its victims often had its lighthearted moments. During the 1880s, when the town's police force was composed of volunteers, it was led by Captain J.B. Carter, according to a story in the Cricket, so it must be true. 2 of our businessmen are to run for police chief next year in opposition to Captain Carter, being encouraged in their decision by their brilliant experience in handling a prisoner a few evenings since. These 2 gentlemen, the Cricket continued, were standing in front of Captain Carter's store when along came Officer Edward Lendl, having in charge 3 drunken prisoners on the way to the police station, then located in the basement of Town Hall. Having his hands full, Mr. Lendl asked the 2 would-be officers if they would be kind enough to escort the 3rd prisoner to the station for him. They readily agreed. One gentleman took his left arm, the other his right. They had proceeded but a few steps when the prisoner suddenly made up his mind to go the other way, which he did, in an exceedingly lively manner, leaving his escorts clinging hopelessly to a coat and vest which their man had neatly slipped out of and left them to remember him by. The last scene of him, he was running to the street like a deer, calling over his shoulder, "Catch me if you can."
I love it.
That might be enough of those. Huh?
Okay. Before we pivot into our last segment, which is police notes, which is Paul's favorite. But I'm just going to tell this story really quickly. So I will just quickly tell you, okay, so the subhead is 2 well-known Essex people die by their own hand within 24 hours of each other. George Gorton and Mrs. Edith Bow take fatal doses of strychnine. Sad affair, the most sensational Essex has had for years. And now remember, this is 1908. So it's illegal, adultery is illegal. And I'll just quickly tell you, 2 suicides in Essex within a few hours of each other stirred the town as it has not been stirred for years, and it has been a sad ending to a very unfortunate affair. George Gorton and Edith Bow were called into police court in Gloucester on Tuesday for examination on a charge of adultery, and they were bound over to a September term of criminal court on a bond of $400 apiece, which was a tremendous amount of money at the time. Wow. In the afternoon, they went home on the trolley. And did anybody see the trolley talk from the Historical Museum by Matthew Swindell? They took the trolley home from Gloucester to Essex. And he took, in the afternoon, Alden took he took a dose of poison. I'm sorry, Bow took the dose of poison. Dr. Stevens was called. Dr. Bailey, a medical examiner from Ipswich, there we have it again, viewed the remains and said that it was death due to poison. He passed away, it was him first, I'm sorry, at 53 years, 3 months and 21 days, which is such a lovely way of writing. So in any case, they both coordinated on committing suicide, and it was such a sad thing that they were both so shamed into, because they had committed, and it turned out that the woman who really, he was from Essex. He grew up in Essex, he still lived in, and he was a farmer, a simple farmer. And he was the same age as she was. And it turned out that her husband was 35 years older than him. So you just think of that story. She literally just ended up falling in love with somebody who was her age, and who she obviously, but what a sad story. So it's a little bit of a, the counterpoint. You can see, he goes for the funny ones and I go for the ones that are so sad. But anyway.
So this is the PS to resist notes.
Okay, can I just,
This is not the pièce de résistance.
I'm going to introduce this with an anecdote that is personal and totally true, and I'll bet a lot of people in this
blush.
room remember this moment. He's going to blush, and I think it's awesome. And he said, "I thought I was going to get fired." So in 2017, I got a text from Max Rodier, who grew up in town, and he was 20 years old at the time. I mean, he was young. Anyway, he texted me a picture of something in the cricket, the police notes, in 2017, and he said he was in Tennessee. It wasn't online, and he was desperate, and everyone was desperate to see the police notes of that week because they were extraordinary. Now, what happened was, unbeknownst to Pat Slade, my predecessor, Paul has collected every outrageous police note that has been, he's for the 10 years before, until I got there. And he went on vacation. And during his vacation, she went onto his computer and to do the police notes for the paper, saw the file called police notes and ran them. And it was a massive hit, by the way. It wasn't like bad. And he said, anyway, so police notes by Paul is
All right.
perfect.
Before I start, I have a
These
caveat.
are his favorites.
I have a caveat. The word tell is a telltale giveaway, especially in poker. A good poker player can tell when an opponent is giving away their hand by any number of incidental gestures. So, if you recognize that you may have made one of these calls, do not look down at your shoes or blush. I've always enjoyed reading police blotters, and I find them amusing. And there's a police blotter every Sunday in the Boston Globe. And one of the most recent ones, and so many police notes entail animals, and some of ours do as well. Some of the ones that were in the Boston Globe had to do with the raccoons, because they're very mischievous. Raccoons can get into all kinds of trouble. We've seen a raccoon break into a tiki bar and get soaked in beer. We've seen one get stuck in a duck box, one that got its head stuck in storm drain grate, one that hitched a ride on a garbage truck. The latest such misadventure happened on Martha's Vineyard on the morning of September 13, when a raccoon was discovered on a high-speed ferry. No one knows when it got on the creature snuck aboard, but police and animal control personnel were able to apprehend the furry stowaway. But somewhere along the line, within those 10 years I worked for Pat and Dave, I started collecting some. They started off mild, and then I started noticing that some were not so mild. And I'm going to share those with you now. And it's just simple lines. They're right from the police notes. They haven't been sanitized. I haven't added anything. I could write my own, but I didn't write these. So I'll start off with, I'm just going to read a few of these. Unrestrained children at Arbella Street. Pine Street, refrigerator on top of homeowner. Overly friendly person reported at Summer Street. Person singing and dancing on Route 128 northbound. Party seeking assistance with a mouse at Summer Street. And then a little naughty one. Man exposed his genitals at Pipeline Road. Someone requested help lifting a dog at Forest Street. There was a sandcastle dispute at Beach Street. Animal control were asked bird questions. A raccoon was on the deck at Brook Street. A seagull caught in rope at Raymond Street. Suspicious, one of my favorite ones. Suspicious activity, man dressed for winter.
That reminds me, I gotta tell you what my all-time favorite one that has actually happened in the last 5 years, right? This one. A woman on Norwood Avenue called in and reported a man outside her window, nude from the waist down. He was wearing khakis.
He's riding his bicycle down to the train station to go to work.
Yeah.
And she reported he was
Nude
naked.
from the waist down.
A man holding an injured bird at the beach, dog complaint, dogs who bark all day, concerned about sexual activity at Upper School Street, dog wandering in the street, 11 dinghies put in timeout by the harbor master. Too much to drink reported on Pine Street, that wasn't me. Rabbit in the yard at Pleasant Street. Lost dog brush reported at Tux Point Road. Help with TV at Powder House Lane. Chickens in the road. Phone rang. No one on the other end. Request for, and he called it in. Request for a cat to be fed at the Plains, ducks in the road at Pleasant, weed whacking in the street, at Summer Street. Car parked in an odd area at Old Neck Road. Lab chasing Meals on Wheels at the Plains. Flag stuck on a pole, deer versus motor vehicle, bat found injured. 3 dozen scratch tickets in the road at Route 128 southbound. This was a short one. Medical call, comma, finger. Injured animal turtle, vehicle egged at Route 128 southbound. Ring and run, the common one.
That was Proctor Street.
That on Proctor Street.
Don't do that on Proctor Street.
Balloons blocking a school driveway at Lincoln Street. The balloons, they had a big balloon arch at the school for, the little feet thing, or, run and all that stuff. And they had a beautiful display of balloons, and someone said they were blocking the driveway. Report of kids in the park.
Yeah.
Dog pooping on my lawn, animal in the chimney, unknown animal in the attic, decoy turkey missing from the lawn at Jeffries Court. RV becoming an eyesore at Raymond Street. Man walking down the street at Old Essex Road. Turtle in the road. Party fell from a hammock at Hickory Hill Road. Male party reported eating food at Summer Street.
Yeah.
2 ladies in kayaks reported to the police department.
Yes.
Suspicious activity, 2 people on the beach taking pictures. Assist a resident who lost their blue hippo stuffed animal at Beach Street.
Yeah.
Report of a ghost. Suspicious activity at Washington Street. Sexual acts in public. Turkey reported injured. Large rock landed in someone's yard at Forest Street. Many patrons visiting Singing Beach. Report of a parakeet in the yard. One of my favorites, parties swallowed their hearing aid at Newport Park. Animal reported in the bathroom, goose on a sign, skunk out for a walk, raccoon living on a boat. Fish hook reported in the head at Tux Point. Suffering raccoon reported, suspicious activity, cat calling at Walker Road. Raccoon reported walking down the street, and last but not least, peacock on a roof at Bridge Street.
There we go.
All true.
All true. You gotta love it. Anyway. All righty. Well, thank you. Although I will say my favorite is in Essex for a long time. They don't do this anymore. Maybe it was regionalization that stopped it, but they used to have the nicest things. They would say, pulled them over, and instead of saying we gave them a warning, right? Their code, the way they wrote it up was, gave them a good talking to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our diamonds in our culture. Thank you for tonight. And please, I know we're
3 minutes over.
Seconds over. Anybody have any questions? They're too good to let go without asking for a few more diamonds.
I mean, no, thank you
That's
for
good. Thank
doing
you
this.
for
This
being
was
here.
fabulous.
Thank you.
And
You can
go
tell
to the
people
library's website and look at the archive and just do a search. Pick a word. Knife. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you all for attending. We look forward to seeing you in February when our next distinguished speaker will be Petra Schlinkard from the PBD Essex Museum. She will be explaining the role fashion has had in our culture throughout from our colonial times to our present day zeitgeist. And I think she goes from trash to fabulous, and we welcome you all as our Valentine return to the Cultural Council and our distinguished speaker series. But tonight, I thank again our dear friends. Thank you.
Thank you.